All right, welcome to another short lecture from Chapter 11. In this one, we're going to talk about new approaches to leadership. So, we talked in the past about some of the perspectives that have been favored previously in examining leadership. Excuse me. And now we're going to talk about some of the more contemporary approaches or understandings of leadership. So, the first one we want to touch on is leadership as symbolic action. Now, this movement to look at leadership in terms of symbolic action emerged alongside the corporate culture perspective, which happened as globalization, the worldwide competition amongst manufacturers really took off, right? So it was in this context that organizations began to say, look, we need strong, visionary leaders. That was a Freudian slip. We need strong visionary leaders who can implement an organization's culture, a particular kind of culture, and its system of values. And so in this context, leadership is realized in the process whereby one or more individuals succeeds in attempting to frame and define the reality of others. So again, this goes with the notion that leadership is all about making people see things in a certain way. So you impose this corporate culture on people, and they absorb it to the point where it becomes natural, where it becomes common sense to them, and it literally affects the way that they view their lives and the way that they view how they define their own reality, in the words of your book. So for an example of this, we can turn back to FDR's inaugural speech. This is a famous speech where that took place during the Depression, where FDR, and I'm not going to play it for you, but if you want to watch it, you certainly can. But FDR here attempts to give people a version of reality, a frame for understanding reality, where they could look at things during the Depression and understand them in a more positive way. And he famously states in this speech, "You have nothing to fear but fear itself," which is a rightfully famous quotation, and one that points to the idea that you don't have to panic, you don't have to be afraid. The only thing you have to be afraid of is panicking. And so this is, of course, a kind of way of framing the world for people, of encouraging them to see the world in a certain way that is beneficial to them and helps people achieve the goals of their country and their society. So according to this model, the role of the leader then is to engage in sense-making for others. So interpreting the situation, making sense of it for others, and then to help them develop a consensus surrounding this worldview. So in other words, listen, this is the way we should look at things, and I'm going to help you see things my way, if that makes sense. So, of course, this kind of leadership is socially constructed because it depends on people sharing this vision. It depends on the leader being able to get people to see things through the lenses or frames that he or she offers. And so, in this sense, one of the essential functions of leadership is the manipulation of corporate culture. So, in other words, you want to affect the culture of the organization in order to facilitate this way of seeing, in order to get people to see things the way that you want to see them. So here again is another video that I'm not going to play just for the sake of brevity. But if you want to watch it, I encourage you to go back and take a look. This is a video where people discuss Steve Jobs and his ability to create what people dubbed the reality distortion field, where he could make people expect things that were perhaps unreasonable, but yet still think of them as reasonable because he was so good at making people see things his way. So I encourage you to check it out if you get a chance. So, what the model of leadership that really emerges out of this way of seeing, this need for visionary leaders is what's known as transformational leadership. And perhaps you've heard of it before. This is another one of these buzzwords, and there are plenty of books out there about it. And again, this really takes shape during the 1980s, where we see intense levels of global competition in the marketplace. Japanese electronics are coming in the United States for the first time. changing the face of the electronics industry. Japanese cars were coming into the U.S. and changing the dynamic of the U.S. car industry. So there's a lot of changes going on. Those are only two examples, but they're big examples that show you that the companies that had, U.S. companies that had gotten pretty secure and safe and feeling pretty good about their position in terms of market dominance, suddenly were challenged in ways that they hadn't been before. And so as a result of these new challenges, we called for this transformational leadership. So according to this way of seeing, there's a difference between leaders and managers. Leadership is all about promoting the values that provide the shared meaning and nature of the organization. So it's the leader's job to establish the values of the organization, work on the culture of the organization. Managers then are concerned with the here and now. So leadership's at the top, managers are underneath, and they're not concerned with these broader issues of identity and so forth. They're concerned with getting things done at the moment, right? So Burns, who's another researcher, uses this sort of binary model where he distinguishes between two different leadership approaches, and he says, one's transformational, the other is transactional. So with the transactional model, the leader sets the goals and provides people with rewards as they reach those goals, like pay and recognition. And this is the managerial worldview. This is the worldview of the people, in this transformation leadership dynamic. These are the people immediately underneath the real leaders. These are the managers, right? And these are people that are interested in rewarding work, and if I pay you enough, then you're going to do a good job, and that's the whole idea behind transactional leadership. You do good for me, I'll do something good for you, the quid pro quo model. Now, transformational leadership binds its leader and the members together for a higher moral kind of purpose. So the leader raises the goals and hopes of followers so that they will think and act beyond their own self-interest. And of course, this is probably, I would suggest to you, one of the hardest things that a leader can do, is really achieve transformational leadership to the extent that it can even be achieved. But the idea here is that you make people believe in the cause to the point where they'll do things that aren't good for them in the best interest of the organization. So this goes back to that conversation we had at the beginning of the semester with regard to how are people in the military inspired to give their lives for their country. Clearly that's not in their best interest, but there's something operating there. Perhaps it's transformational leadership that makes these soldiers willing to sacrifice and act in ways that aren't in their own best interest in order to further the organization. In this case, the organization might be the military, or on a broader scale, their country, right? So for Bass, who's another researcher, Bass says transformational leadership style is about three things: charisma, inspiring people; individualized consideration, so treating people as human beings; and then finally, intellectual stimulation, getting people to think about why they're there. So, for example, if we were going to apply this to college and professoring or teaching, for example, we could think of charisma or inspiration as the teacher who gets you inspired to work. The individualized consideration is the teacher who's interested in you and interested in facilitating your learning. And then finally, stimulating you intellectually, getting you interested in the larger scheme of things, getting you interested in learning for learning's sake, perhaps, even. And so this model, in some ways, is a return to the great man or leader as hero approach that we talked about that was popular through the 1940s. It's not really trait-based necessarily, but it certainly invests much of its faith and promise in the leader, and not in the followers necessarily. So the flip side of that then is this followership model. And this is, again, one that really intrigues me because it's based on the idea that leaders don't exist without followers, which, as I told you before, really struck me as an interesting idea when I first heard it. So the idea here then is that leaders and followers are mutually defining. They make each other. You can't have followers without a leader, and you can't have a leader without followers. And this way of thinking comes out of an influential book that debuted in 1988, written by Robert Kelly, called In Praise of Followers. And in it, Kelly develops a two-dimensional model where he says, okay, we need to think about this, followers and leadership, in terms of independent critical thinking versus dependent uncritical thinking, excuse me. And then we need to think about positive energy, active engagement, versus negative energy and passive engagement. And so when he puts these things together, he puts them together in this kind of chart, right? So, ideally, if you're a leader, what the kind of culture you want to foster, or the kind of employees that you're looking for, are these, right? People that are both active and to some extent independent and critical thinkers. Right? Now this can be hard to achieve, of course, because many people who are independent critical thinkers oftentimes end up alienated in organizations because of perceived shortcomings and the fact that they're just able to think through a lot of the strategic ambiguity as it's presented by leadership. The simple truth is that most leaders are ineffective. And that's it's unfortunate, but it's very true. It should also be noted that a leader, an organization doesn't have to have an effective leader in order to be successful. And that's something that is often overlooked as well. So oftentimes organizations succeed despite its leadership. So in any event, these Kelly said, listen, these roles that we come up with by looking at these two axes of independent critical thinking and dependent uncritical thinking, as well as active and passive kinds of behaviors. He says that these aren't personality types, rather they're roles, and that the same person can occupy different roles at different times. And so we need to understand that once people occupy one of these roles, it's not static, it's subject to change. Now, in line with this idea of charismatic leaders and so on, we find Meindl's romantic theory. And Meindl was concerned with how followers make leaders in terms of, how do they see them? How do they construct this image of leadership in their minds? And Meindl said leaders are romanticized in ways that exaggerate their importance and their influence. That we think leaders are more important than perhaps they really are. And that, again, this relationship between leaders and followers is constructed. It's not natural. It's something that people make. And that leadership emerges out of a kind of social contagion, where the reputation of the person spreads amongst organization members like a virus. So over time, people start talking, she's really good. She's got great ideas. I don't want to be on her team. I want to be with her. And in this talking, they construct this role of leadership for the person. And further, Meindl takes it even one step further and says, listen, charisma, the charismatic leader, is not an objective kind of trait, but rather exists in the sense-making process of followers. So someone is charismatic only if you see them as charismatic. So what's the basic tenets of the followership approach are that it decenters the idea of great and heroic leaders. So it concentrates on followers, and it says that leaders keep winning because their followers perceive them as winners. So they don't even really have to win. All that matters is that their followers see them as winning. And so leaders can only be effective if the followers think they're effective. So even if you're achieving goals, if the people that work for you don't think that you're effective, from this standpoint, we might argue that you're not in terms of leadership. And of course, what's key to this is this first follower kind of notion, which says, you need that first follower to really gain a leadership kind of role. And so this can be seen in this short video, which is kind of silly, and hopefully will load up pretty soon. Here you go.
If you've learned a lot about leadership and making a movement, then let's watch a movement happen, start to finish, in under 3 minutes, and dissect some lessons. First, of course, a leader needs the guts to stand alone and look ridiculous. But what he's doing is so simple, it's almost instructional. This is key. You must be easy to follow.
And there's the
Now, here
first
comes
follower.
the first follower with a crucial role. He publicly shows everyone else how to follow. Notice how the leader embraces him as an equal. So it's not about the leader anymore. It's about them, plural. Notice how he's calling to his friends to join in. So it takes guts to be a first follower. You stand out and you brave ridicule yourself. Being a first follower is an underappreciated form of leadership. The first follower transforms a lone nut into a leader. If the leader is...
And so, of course, after a little while, you have everybody dancing, right? So you see how important this role of the first follower is in terms of this followership model. All right, that's it for this lecture. Next time we'll talk about what is the current critical communication perspective on leadership.